I don't know why I'm rearranging a plant you can't even see. You're most probably here because you, A, are autistic and you are trying to articulate your autism diagnosis to your friends, your family, and your colleagues. And if this is the case, I hope my videos can help you express your experiences to others and support you in your journey of self-acceptance and self-discovery. Alternatively, you may be person B, who is a friend or a family member of someone who has recently been diagnosed with autism and or ADHD because they are highly comorbid, and you want to better understand their behaviour and their experiences. And I applaud you if this is the case, because your search for understanding is commendable, and it is people like you who will drive the world toward inclusivity and reduce the need for those individuals to mask their differences, which only ever leads to internalized ableism, burnout, and comorbid mental illness, which no one wants. And if you do, you're a sociopath. She's right. Thus, this series of videos aims to assist autistic individuals, their friends, their family, to better understand autism and the associated behaviours. They're the videos I wish I had when I was advocating for my neurodiverse needs for the first time. They're the tools I wish I could have shared with my friends and my family, those who were describing me as becoming more autistic post-diagnosis, when I was merely becoming more comfortable and not actively suppressing some of my autistic behaviours. These videos could have helped me explain some of my autistic behaviours and tendencies that often were misunderstood during translation and that those around me really struggled to understand. Autism as a disorder versus autism as a neurotype. When it comes to autism, I understand why many are influenced by outdated narratives that pathologise the condition and only focus on external manifestations of that individual's behaviour, such as body language, speech. But it's vital that we now recognise autism, an internal state that can manifest in a variety of external behaviours. We have very much boxed autism into a very limited stereotype due to a lack of awareness and understanding, which is now not the case. We have moved on, we have advanced, we have a lot more research. The stereotype of a little boy who is socially inept, flapping his hands and rocking back and forth in a corner, having constant meltdowns, is so harmful and so limiting and leads to so many missed opportunities for support and misdiagnosis. We need to stop. And this stereotype of autism is only perpetuated by pop culture and media. Think of Rain Man, think of Sheldon Cooper. But when you actually look closer and examine these external manifestations of behaviour, you actually see that most of those behaviours manifest in an autistic brain under certain types of distress. And by autistic brain, I am simply referring to autism as a neurotype. And this is the way an individual's brain is wired. So this means an autistic brain or an autistic individual would exhibit structural and neuronal variability compared to the standard neurotypical brain. And neurotypical brains make up the majority of society, so they are the normal. But being different does not mean being defective. All these neurological differences mean is that those individuals perceive and experience the world in a slightly different way compared to the rest of society or the neurotypical majority. And there's nothing wrong with that. And I don't know why we ever created a narrative that it was wrong.
Clownery, in short.
Ugh, like, what? Is difference really that threatening?
Yes.
And yes, you must elicit the behaviours listed within the DSM-5 to receive a diagnosis. I don't dispute that, but I'm trying to emphasise that it is the way the behaviours manifest and when that is individual to the autistic person and their environment. This difference can make things enjoyable, but also make other things very difficult. Things considered easy for neurotypical brains may be extremely challenging for autistic individuals because their brain fundamentally processes the world, its information, slightly differently. And the first point I'm trying to stress here is that autism is not a disease. It is simply a difference in neurotype. Autism does not mean that person is defective. It does not mean that person needs to be fixed. And that person certainly does not need your pity. It is a neurotype with a cluster of predispositions that will present differently from person to person, making those individuals more vulnerable to experience certain kinds of distress, but doesn't guarantee that will happen. Everyone is different. Everyone's processing profiles are very different, meaning their preferred environment will be very different. And viewing autism as a neurotype rather than a disorder is so useful because it allows you to then focus on understanding how the autistic brain interacts with their environment and its stresses. And although some people refer to autism as autism spectrum disorder, which it is technically, I actually think it's more accurate to describe autism as autistic distress rather than a disorder, because the behaviours can vary based on the individual's environment and its demands. And I think this is actually one of the many reasons why people, including myself, receive a late autism diagnosis. Because of the very limited stereotype, many realise they are autistic quite late, and it takes a prolonged period of exceeding their limited capacities and the repercussions of that to realise they are autistic. Because if you are unaware of your autistic needs, you are going to chronically subject yourself to environments with demands that are incompatible with your autistic needs and preferences. You are likely going to struggle in those environments, not understand why, and not understand how to fix it. For example, when I look back, if I had known I was autistic, I probably would not have subjected myself to certain environments so frequently, and I probably would have put some things in place that catered for some of my autistic preferences to prevent meltdown, to prevent sensory overwhelm and overstimulation. A diagnosis is very helpful in that sense. It allows you to strategize and work towards a better quality of life and better functioning. Unfortunately, many autistic adults receive or seek a diagnosis after finally exhausting their internal resources and possibly experiencing autistic burnout due to the intense physical, mental, and emotional exhaustion that results from the cumulative effect of navigating a world designed for neurotypical individuals. Metaphorically, they have been keeping their head above water until this point. It was only when they started to drown that possible autism reared its head. And this was the case for me because I didn't fully understand my neurodivergence, and I only put all of the pieces of the puzzle together when I was receiving eating disorder treatment, which during I was referred and formally diagnosed with ADHD and then autism. And it saddens me that that's how I got to my diagnosis, because the reason why I received a diagnosis in the end was because eating disorder treatment that is made for the neurotypical majority was ineffective with my brain and neurodiverse needs. I needed an entirely different approach to my eating disorder recovery. That was just a horrible, horrible time, and the system very much failed me. But it's besides the point. It's not besides the point.
But
this is not what the video is about. And this struggle doesn't need to manifest within burnout or an eating disorder.
just examples.
It can also contribute to developing things like social anxiety, depression, and other mental illnesses, because mental illnesses are just manifestations of that individual's inability to cope with their environment and its stresses. And I truly believe the high prevalence rates of comorbid mental illnesses among autistic individuals is in large part due to their neurodivergent difficulties, which they have tried to and failed to cope with. And realising you're autistic, receiving a diagnosis, is the first essential step to developing effective coping strategies, because putting the puzzle together is far easier and quicker if you have access to the picture on the box, i.e. autism. When I received my autism diagnosis in my early 20s, it was not a revelation of something new, but it was confirmation of something that had always been present. And it was with this understanding that I then realised how certain neurodivergent traits had been overlooked. It became clear why I was only recommended to seek an autism diagnosis during eating disorder treatment, how certain neurodivergent traits were hidden and compensated for during early adolescent years and childhood. It helped me explain why certain oddities that were just Rebecca were actually manifestations of my autism and ADHD and just how my brain worked. For example, during childhood, my mother very much acted as my executive functioning until, honestly, university, because she was a stay-at-home mother, and I love her for that. And I don't resent anything that she did, because she has made me who I am today. But she did take care of planning, prioritising, reminding us of the time, telling us when we have forgotten things. And unfortunately, it was only when this support system disappeared during my transition to university that my executive dysfunction related to ADHD and my autistic differences in processing had a debilitating impact on all areas of my life. Similarly, I actually found ways of compensating for my differences in processing style and my sensory sensitivities during secondary and primary school. My autistic preferences and way of learning was incompatible with the school environment, and because of this I struggled too much to work and take anything in during class, and not out of a lack of trying. Like, I was a good student, I wanted to do well, I was determined to do well, but this meant I had to do all my work at home, all of it on top of homework, which I now understand was probably due to a poor working memory and my inherent struggle to prioritise and plan. I would rush home every single day and rush through all of my homework, all of my work that day as soon as I got in the door, out of the fear of forgetting what the teacher said we needed to do and when it was due. Unfortunately, this was not conducive with rest and preventing exhaustion. There was a period of time in school where I literally was having one day off every single week because I was so unbelievably exhausted by just being in the environment, which is crazy. But unfortunately, my good grades and lack of disruptive behaviour meant that my struggles were not recognised and no action was taken.
My life be like.
And often individuals with late diagnosis have experienced similar situations where their traits were present during childhood, but they were labelled as something entirely different, or they had environments that actually hid some of their neurodivergent difficulties at the time, which you then look back at and you're like, my God, like how did I miss this? What?
Is there anybody in here?
No!
At the time, there was a lack of awareness and understanding surrounding autism and ADHD, especially in girls. So I'm unsurprised that my behaviours were not adequately addressed or understood. And if my family and I knew then what we do now, my difficulties with clothing, sitting still, following verbal instructions, reaching milestones, processing information would have been recognised as symptoms of autism and ADHD rather than mere quirks, incompetence, or low intellect. I would have thought twice about subjecting myself to certain environments, and I would not have internalised my failure to meet societal neurotypical standards as personal faults. But even though the diagnosis came later in life, it finally has been such a relief to understand and embrace my neurodivergence. And this is why I emphasise autism to be viewed as a neurotype rather than a disorder, because by doing so, you can then better understand why it affects each individual so differently and why each autistic individual exhibits different behaviours in varying environments to different degrees of intensity. In short, autism creates a broad spectrum of traits or manifestations of those traits. Defining an autistic experience using the autism spectrum or using the autism wheel. For a long time, people have used the concept of spectrum to describe an individual's autistic experience, but this representation is usually a flat line with values on either end, and with autism, these values tend to be low functioning and high functioning. But labelling someone along this spectrum to describe their autism is highly limiting for so many reasons. But number one, it oversimplifies their needs and unique abilities. These narrow definitions of low and high functioning tend to be based on how well that person fits into neurotypical ideals, which is wrong. For example, someone who is non-verbal may be labelled as low functioning and because of this be dismissed without any recognition for their strengths and their talents. Yet someone like myself, who is verbal the majority of the time and can articulate themselves quite well, she says, always room for improvement, may be seen as high functioning, which can then prevent that individual from getting the support they need, whether that be accommodations at work, university, school, or at home. We need to stop boxing autism into a very limited presentation. Instead, we need to think of autism as a wheel, because this graphic provides a far more in-depth understanding of the unique complexities and nuances of an individual's autistic experience. Instead of focusing on the external factors, such as how well that person fits into the neurotypical world, it allows that person to express their own unique autistic experience, communicate their own unique support needs, because the autism wheel features a collection of potential autistic traits which can be manipulated by that autistic individual. For example, one section of the wheel maybe sensory sensitivities, another special interests, another stimming behaviour, another social anxiety. The wheel of autistic traits and preferences will be unique to the individual. This approach not only helps the autistic individual, but those around them better understand their unique individual needs, because someone who is classed as high functioning may not appear to need as much support, but actually, when you examine their autism wheel closer, you just see that they need more support in other areas. For example, an individual who is classed as high functioning may not struggle as much with social interactions, which is something others commonly but erroneously equate to being less autistic. But then they have significant difficulties with things like executive function, which can range from struggling with things like hygiene to difficulty switching tasks. This person is no more or less autistic than the next. They just need support in some areas rather than in others. Everyone's autism will look a little bit different, which is how it should do, because no autistic individual is the same. No autistic individual has the exact same support needs. It's crucial to gain a deeper understanding of autism beyond the DSM criteria, because doing so then allows you to view and comprehend that autistic individuals' behaviour in a new, enlightening way. And although can be difficult, you have to approach any autistic individual with curiosity and compassion without making assumptions, because this way you provide them with the opportunity to share their own experiences and you provide them space to advocate for their unique accommodations. A diagnosis for an autistic person can be incredibly useful, self-affirming and highly validating, because it now helps them explain why they struggle in certain situations that others find effortlessly easy, and it highlights areas which they need help in and allows them to confidently advocate for their needs. Whereas prior to a diagnosis, you're kind of just struggling and you don't know why, and you kind of just feel defective and you don't know why, and you want to fix it, but you don't know how because you don't know what's wrong. You just know something's wrong and you are struggling immensely. Like how people functioning normally and creating a compassionate space for self-acceptance and self-discovery. Giving autistic individuals the opportunity to share their experiences and their difficulties is a compassionate act in itself, and It is essential for our journey of self-discovery, self-acceptance, and self-advocacy. And if an individual chooses to reveal their diagnosis to you, please be aware that that likely took courage and careful consideration, because although the world is changing, there is still a negative narrative associated with and limited to this neurotype. And if you're unsure how to respond or approach someone with autism, I suggest adopting a balanced perspective where you acknowledge the neurotype's challenges and their unique abilities. Because if you refer to autism as purely an asset or a superpower, you can sometimes unintentionally minimize their struggles. Conversely, viewing autism only as a defect or a disability then ignores the beauty and the unique traits of that autist. Instead, we should be striving to understand their strengths and their weaknesses, because that way you can then adapt their environment and modify your expectations accordingly. Anyway, I hope sharing my perspective has helped you gain a deeper understanding of this neurotype and assists you in fostering meaningful connections with individuals who identify as autistic. However, if you are autistic yourself and you feel comfortable enough, please feel free to comment and share your own experiences, revealing your diagnosis to your family, your friends, your colleagues. Did they react well? Do you wish they responded differently? Because I think the sharing of experiences is what makes all of us feel so much less alone. And it's just, this community of people is just wonderful, so accepting, non-judgmental, and I just love it. I hope you enjoyed the video. I will see you in the next one. Have a lovely day.